At first glance, it had all the makings of a tragic accident. A young man racing down the highway at over 100 miles an hour loses control. His passenger is killed. Collision reconstructionist Sergeant Christopher M. Keller is one of the first on the scene.
As a reconstructionist, we take a collision and try and figure out what happened, whether it be human error or if it's a vehicular default or an intentional act.
And in this case, making that determination meant learning more about the girl lying next to the mangled wreck, 17-year-old Samantha Heller.
Talk to me about your daughter.
Sammy was my youngest child. She was my only daughter. She was a spitfire. She made life so much fun.
Sam was the goofiest person that you could ever meet. I mean, she was a real comedian. Like, she could make you laugh even if you're about to cry. Like, she was great.
A social butterfly with a big heart.
She was just such a decent, loving, caring girl. Sammy loved everybody.
But that may have also been her downfall. Samantha was just 15 when she met an older boy named Benjamin Klinger.
I met him once. I didn't really want to, but Sam wanted me to meet him. And he just had a very dark personality, gave me chills. When I saw him, I couldn't even look him in the eye.
I remember one time Sam had brought me she'd wanted me to be friends with Ben more. We were on the highway and he was speeding so fast. It scared me, and I said to Sam, like, can he slow down? She's like, oh no, he's fine. He always drives like this. His willingness to risk our lives on that highway scared me, definitely.
It was around that same time that Samantha's friends started noticing slight changes.
I would say that her silly side was still there. She could still always make anyone laugh, but you could slowly see Sam's face turn into just like she was hurt. She was hurting.
Hurting because of how they say Ben was treating her behind closed doors.
She told me at the beginning he was he acted very nice and made her feel like happy and made her feel loved, and then things just deteriorated after he got control of her. And once he knew that she was in love with him, things just started spiraling downwards.
He started to say that she was clingy. He would call her he would call her a and I asked her, I was like, so like, why? Like, why are you with him? And she's like, I love him, and he makes it better by saying, I'm so sorry. And she admitted that draws her back in every time.
And Sam's mom says every time Ben drew her back in, it drove her and her daughter further apart.
She was starting to say, well, I should be allowed to stay out at, these hours during a school night, and we were having more arguments.
And do you think all of that was really stemming from Ben?
Yeah, he actually would try to come over and convince us she would be safe, and I'll make sure she gets her homework done and stuff like that.
At some point, things within the house broke apart.
We had found out that she was giving Ben our house keys to sneak in the house at night.
When she confronted her daughter, a huge fight ensued.
And it was a mess. And it's one of the biggest mistakes I made, because I kicked her out that day. And she ran to Ben.
Samantha would spend the next few months living under the Klingers' roof, and loved ones say that's when the relationship really turned toxic.
She told me that he would push her. She came in once with a big green bruise on her arm, and I didn't even ask her because I just knew. And I was like, are you okay? And she was like, I'll talk to you about it later, and just never did.
But Samantha's mom wasn't just standing idly by.
The last straw in that situation was got a phone call that she was being taken to the hospital. I found out that he had run over her foot.
After that, Sandra was finally able to convince Samantha to move out of Ben's house and in with her aunt, Leanne. But even then,
shortly after she moved in with us, he decided to come over and sit outside our house. And that made Sammy really antsy. She said, please, can I go out and talk to him? So we let her go out and talk to him. She went out, he took off with her.
Not long after that, Leanne gets a frantic call from her niece.
She was scared because he was driving too fast and he was angry.
Lancaster County District Attorney Craig Stedman elaborates.
Well, she's interviewing with Ben, and Klinger at that point, he basically said, you better get off the phone or I will. You know, I'll drive this car off the road and you want any relatives to talk to me, is what he said.
Samantha was able to talk him down that night, and after that, she appeared to break things off for good, even agreeing to move back home with her mom. It was only then that Sandra learned just how bad things had been.
I found out that not only was he physically hurting her at times, that he was taking pictures and videos of them sexually and sharing it with his friends.
Of your minor daughter.
Of my minor daughter.
This is your child.
This is my child that before meeting him, she didn't do stuff like this. She was a good girl.
Sandra took action.
I charged him for running over her foot. I charged him for the pictures. He was going to be charged and labeled as a pedophile.
You weren't playing around.
No, it's hardball time.
For the next 6 months, with charges pending, Ben seemed to stay away, and Samantha seemed to return to her old self.
You were starting to get your daughter back.
Right.
Then, the night of December 4th, Sandra is already asleep when she gets a text from Samantha, the kind you never erase.
It was the last thing she ever said to me.
What did she tell you?
She said, I love you, Mama.
Sometime after that, Samantha Heller finds herself in the passenger seat of Benjamin Klinger's car, racing toward her own demise. It seemed like she was finally free, like 17-year-old Samantha Heller had finally broken away from her abuser, Benjamin Klinger. She had even moved back in with her mom and was moving forward on assault charges against the boy, as well as charges for sending explicit pictures of the underage girl to his friends.
She was doing so well. I didn't hear his name for a while, you know, and like, you could just tell like she was in different spirits.
But then, after 6 months apart, it seems Ben found a way back in.
She calls me up to her room and proceeds to tell me that they had been pressuring her, you know, making her feel bad because of the upcoming charges.
Apparently, Ben reached out to get Samantha to drop the charges, especially the one that would make him a registered sex offender.
So he gets her to sign something that says, I don't want to press charges.
Then, just a few days before the end, Samantha changed her mind again.
She actually comes into our office here and she starts explaining, look, you intimidated me, I didn't really know what I was signing. You know, I do want something done. I don't want him to go to jail, but I want some accountability.
Restitution, as she put it in this note to Ben, a handwritten list of things she wanted to discuss, one big thing in particular.
December 3rd, she had gone to Planned Parenthood. She believed she was pregnant.
With Ben's baby.
And one of the things on the note is she wanted child support.
She told me she was back with him, and I was just so angry because she was doing so well, and I was like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. Sorry.
It was the last time Paige Myers and her friend would ever speak. The day after Samantha's visit to Planned Parenthood, December 4th, she tells her mom she's spending the weekend with a friend. Instead, she was inside Ben's car, speeding down the highway at nearly 120 miles per hour.
Lancaster County 911, do you need police, fire, ambulance?
I need both. There's a car on fire, Interstate 283.
It's approximately 2 a.m. when a truck driver calls 911 to report seeing Ben's car careen off the highway and into a guardrail.
It was a two-door car, and that entire passenger side had a huge amount of damage to it.
Samantha's side of the car, and yet she survives the initial crash.
We got a car with injuries just past the Mount Joy exit. All right.
So in the 911 call, you hear Samantha screaming. It's not clear what she's saying, but you can hear that she's still alive and is screaming.
What you said is just the one car? Yes. Okay. Sir, tell me what to do because this person is upside down.
Okay. Okay, we don't want to move them. Just try to keep them safe.
Following protocol, the dispatcher tells the witness not to move the injured. What he doesn't know is exactly what the trucker sees.
Samantha was sort of half in, half out the car, face down in the grass. And the civilians saw Mr. Klinger essentially sitting on Samantha's head.
Not long after that, Samantha falls silent.
How many people were in the car altogether? 2 people.
2.
Okay. Are they both awake?
No. The one's unconscious. The girl screamed, but she stopped.
Okay. Okay.
There's help coming, sweetheart. Stay still.
By the time first responders arrive, Samantha Heller is gone. Ben will later tell investigators that he doesn't remember exactly how the crash happened, but that it was all a tragic accident.
So he said he was ejected from the vehicle and landed up coincidentally through the passenger side of the vehicle and happens to land with his, butt sitting on her face, smothering her to death just by coincidence.
But almost immediately, Sergeant Christopher Keller and his team were finding evidence that this was no coincidence.
For example, the witness said that he didn't see any brake lights as Mr. Klinger was going off the road. That's a pretty telltale sign that there's something else going on.
You can see actually in the grass that he drove straight into the guardrail. I mean, it was a controlled crash.
Police also found Samantha's handwritten note inside the wreck. And then there was that 911 call, those screams. Though you can't make out what Samantha is saying on that recording, another eyewitness says she heard everything.
The car driver actually who pulled over said she actually could hear her saying, get off me,
Wow.
and could see her moving her legs.
She couldn't breathe. It's hard knowing that your child suffered in the end.
It was only a few hours before that when Sandra McFalls received a text message from her daughter saying, quote, "I love you, Mama."
And I didn't know. When I got up the next morning, I replied, I'm like, "I love you too, honey, and when you coming home?"
When did you get a phone call something terrible had happened?
Police had showed up, and he told me that there had been a tragic accident. As soon as they mentioned that it was with Ben, I said, this was no tragic accident. He murdered her.
And police took that claim seriously, especially after a pathologist determined Samantha's cause of death to be multiple traumatic injuries and asphyxia. Manner of death, homicide.
The evidence showed he intentionally killed Samantha.
Almost immediately after news spread that 17-year-old Samantha Heller had been killed in a crash and that her abusive boyfriend Ben Klinger was driving, everyone who knew the girl jumped to the same conclusion.
I knew right away that it wasn't an accident.
And Samantha's loved ones were telling investigators much the same.
One friend actually described it as her life was a living hell. He basically made her feel worthless every day of her life. In his phone contacts, she's listed as dumb Heller. That's who would come up. On his contacts, it would come up, dumb Heller, which is awful to say, but that's what he thought of her.
And then there were Ben's lies. Shortly after the wreck, Klinger reportedly told a nurse at the hospital, quote, "I feel guilty. I told her she could lay down in the back seat without a seatbelt on, and she was pregnant with my child, and now she's dead."
He said she was in the back seat. We could prove she wasn't. You can see the impact, head impact here.
And for Ben's claims that he was thrown from the wreck and onto Samantha,
You knew he was lying.
We could prove he was 100% lying. We know he had a seatbelt on because he had the bruises on it, and here, consistent with it. But when you're ejected, the seatbelt's ripped, or it's ripped out of the casing or anything like that. There was absolutely no damage to the seatbelt consistent with ejection. And the other thing the reconstructionists were able to tell us was there's no way that the driver would, under this head-on collision with the guardrail, would be ejected 90 degrees to his right through the passenger side vehicle and land up over her, sitting on top of her.
meaning that to end up on Samantha, Ben had to actually unbuckle his seatbelt after the crash and walk around to the other side of the car.
When you think about what Sammy had to go through that night.
It's horrible. It's horrible. She crawled out of the car. He got out of his side, walked around the front of the car, and sat on top of her.
It's almost too much to bear to even think about her crawling out of that vehicle and having a second chance at life. She was so close.
She was, but he wasn't going to let it happen. He wasn't going to let it happen.
And after weeks of collecting evidence, prosecutors were ready to make that case.
He was charged with criminal homicide for the death of Samantha.
But what was it that authorities say finally pushed Ben over the edge? District Attorney Craig Stedman says, take your pick.
It's a crescendo of motives that are coming together at this period of time that lead to the murder. I mean, you've got the unwanted pregnancy that he thinks is happening. You've got her charges, so he's mad at that. Plus, one of the other things that we found out later was he actually had another girl that he was seeing who he actually said at the hospital something to the effect of, well, at least we don't have to worry about her getting in between you and I in the future.
It is only later that investigators learned Samantha wasn't pregnant after all. But Ben didn't know that at the time, and according to his arrest affidavit, he was either angry because he was going to be a father, or jealous because he thought it was someone else's baby. Either way, prosecutors believe they have him dead to rights.
We felt we had a very, very strong case for first-degree murder. We could prove that he was lying about what took place. Him at the hospital telling his girlfriend that now we can be together. We had all that stuff of the pregnancy.
And the former threats.
And the former threats, I mean, threats, not just threats, but threats to kill her by driving a car off the road. He did exactly what he said he was going to do multiple times to her.
But as it turns out, the case would never go to trial.
We felt we had a mountain of evidence for first degree. But when you have these cases, it's not just about what you can prove, it's about dealing with the surviving victims and the family members.
And for Sandra's mom, pursuing the first-degree murder charges would mean reliving the unimaginable.
I don't think that you can underestimate how difficult this particular trial would have been on the family members. Just her manner of death, all that stuff, we would have had to go into great detail. Injury, broken bone after broken bone, how she was begging for her life.
So when attorneys worked out a deal that would avoid a trial in exchange for Klinger pleading guilty to third-degree murder with a minimum sentence of close to 30 years.
I was tired. I just wanted to go home and grieve. And so I made a choice to allow him to have that plea deal.
First degree was off the table, but Ben was off the streets.
What was he sentenced to?
It was 28 to 56 years. Personally, I was like, this guy deserves first degree and the rest of his life in jail. But it's easy for me to say because I'm not the family. They're the ones that have to live with this.
As part of his deal, Benjamin Klinger also pleads guilty to several other charges, including sending explicit photos of his underage girlfriend to friends. At sentencing, he's given the chance to address Samantha's family, saying, quote, I accept full responsibility for the loss of a very special person. I want you to know with all my heart, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. In response, Lancaster County Judge Margaret Miller delivers the following statement. Quote, today is the first day I've seen any degree of humanity or emotion in you. There is no doubt in my mind you lived your life with a callousness, arrogance, and a cowardliness, because being a bully is a coward.
The judge had some choice words that I rarely see handling the issues that were raised by the defense.
After that, 21-year-old Benjamin Klinger is taken away to serve out his 28 to 56-year sentence. End of story? Not exactly.
What happened in the post-conviction hearing?
Well, the guy pled guilty. This wasn't a trial where he went down saying, I didn't do this, you got the wrong guy, I'm innocent, I was framed. He admitted in court to the judge that he did these things that I've described. And he took the benefit of the bargain, and now he wants a do-over.
Even for seasoned investigators, the way Samantha Heller died is almost too difficult to comprehend.
Been doing this for 26 years, seen a lot. It would be one of the worst deaths imaginable because she suffered a traumatic injury to her body. She would have known the impact was coming, and to have her murder, smothering somebody, you don't die right away from that. And so it would be an absolutely helpless end of her life.
And those were the horrific details Samantha Heller's family avoided at trial when Benjamin Klinger pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. But then, roughly 4 years into his 28 to 56-year sentence, Klinger suddenly files an appeal to have his plea overturned.
Ben trying to step up and want to take this plea deal off the table, I'm sure is infuriating.
It really makes me mad. This is my baby. And he took her and he ripped her life apart. He had no right.
So what changed? Why does Samantha's confessed killer now say he isn't guilty of deliberately taking her life? And what was to be his first time speaking publicly about the case, Benjamin Klinger was about to tell us himself.
Thank you for taking my call.
Right away from State Correctional Institution in Albion, Pennsylvania, Ben tells our producers there's one thing he wants to make perfectly clear.
I fully take responsibility for the passing of Samantha Heller.
But he says it wasn't murder, third degree or otherwise.
I believe I'm at fault for not driving in a safe manner.
Do you wish you had gone to trial then?
Yes, so much. If I knew then what I knew now, I wouldn't have done it. I would have went to trial so I could tell my story.
One, he says, is much different than the version most people have heard.
Those stories of abuse, that's exactly what they were. They were stories. They weren't, as you can see in the pictures, she was not afraid of me. She wasn't scared of the relationship. She loved attention. She loved getting sympathy from others. And she knew the best way to get attention and to get sympathy was tell stories.
But prosecutors say what Ben is calling stories were all true, including one in which Samantha called her aunt from inside Ben's car. Ben screaming, quote, "If you don't get off the phone with your expletive relatives right now, I'm going to run this car right off the road."
I never said that. No, that's an absolute falsehood. I would never want to take her away from her family. I would have never hurt her. No, that claim is absolutely false.
But ultimately, that is what happened. Ben was behind the wheel during the crash that ended Samantha's life. So what does he have to say about that tragic night?
I can't tell you specifically because I don't remember the accident or hours and hours leading up to it.
A convenient excuse.
I had such a severe concussion. The doctor at the hospital told my family that, that they wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if I never remember anything. Because of the severity of the concussion, that I don't remember hours before and days after.
How or why Samantha even ended up in his car? All a blank. And he's not sure how that handwritten list of demands ended up in his car either.
I know what the police report said. It looks as if that note was us discussing points for our relationship.
Including one very big point, a request for child support.
That note, as part of what the prosecutor calls a crescendo of motives, a series of things that would have angered Ben Klinger and made him furious enough to do what he did.
Well, it's just not true. As far as child support, I think child support would never have been a problem with me. I'm really family-oriented man.
Yeah.
I would love to have it, and I would have all the way been okay with having support.
But if that's so true, how does Ben explain having another girlfriend at the time? And what was he overheard saying to her?
I'll read the quote. At the hospital, Klinger telling his girlfriend, "Now we can be together and she won't be between us anymore."
The thing to understand is that the condition that I was in with the head trauma, the concussion, medications that I was on from just being in the car accident myself, I don't remember hardly anything of that time period. I can't verify that I even said that. I've seen the court documents, I've seen the quotes, but it doesn't sound like my character.
And he says he's equally confused by some of the other things he's been reported saying after the crash, like that he ended up on Samantha's head after being ejected from the car.
That doesn't make sense. I don't think I was ejected, and if I said that. I don't know if somebody asked me that when I was in that fugue state, and I didn't know, and I said yes. You know, I was very confused and disoriented, and I don't remember anything from that time.
Again, an answer that seemed just a little too easy, and it brings up another question. If he can't even remember the crash, why did he plead guilty to third-degree murder?
I intended to plead guilty to causing an accident that took a young woman's life. I did not realize that third degree was there's intent and there's malice. I was guilty of causing the death of Samantha from a car accident, but not in a malicious way that is murder.
And he says his defense at the time didn't adequately explain that.
My lawyer was ineffective. He guided me toward that plea. He coerced me into that plea. That made me guilty of actual murder and not a car accident. And I can't accept that. You know, I did not kill Sam.
In fact, as part of his appeal, Klinger's new defense team points to another culprit altogether.
Yeah, you know, the guardrail pierced the car, went through the front dashboard and through the passenger area and out the door. Guardrails are not meant to operate that way. My lawyer hired an engineer to look at that guardrail, and in fact did, and is willing to testify that very likely we both would have walked away from that accident had it been the correct guardrail design.
But District Attorney Craig Stedman has a response to that.
You know, last time I checked, guardrails don't reach out and murder people. The only reason the guardrail's an issue is if you drive the car into it at 100 miles an hour head on. Guardrail murdered? No. Benjamin Klinger murder. The guardrail didn't drive the car at 115 miles an hour off the road. Guardrail didn't cause 2 years of abuse. The guardrail didn't threaten to kill her. It's just really stupid. I rarely say that about other arguments that I've seen in court, but this is one of the dumbest ones. On top of that, it's really offensive. It's really insulting.
But Ben insists it was a contributing factor, that he never did anything to intentionally cause the death of Samantha. And that, believe it or not, having his conviction overturned is just as much for Samantha's family as it is for him.
You know, I think it's a tragic miscarriage of justice. It's not just that it's unfair to me, it's unfair to her family, it's unfair to her friends. It's not fair that they have to try and live with this terrible picture painted of how she passed. And it is terrible how she passed, but to try and say that it was an intentional act is not just a smear on me, but it's a smear on her legacy. At the end of the day, someone I really cared about passed away.
And that's pretty much where our conversation cut off, with Ben continuing to stand firm that, despite what he swore in court, he didn't murder Samantha Heller. At least, he doesn't remember doing it. So far, a judge has rejected Klinger's efforts to have his plea overturned. But Ben is currently appealing that ruling. And if he does get his second chance...
I'll tell you something, I'm really kind of okay with a do-over because a do-over doesn't get him a less sentence. A do-over gets him back to square one, you have a trial, and he faces life in prison. So I'll put this in the category, be careful what you wish for.
And Samantha's loved ones say Ben won't be facing the same people he did before.
By some slim chance, his appeal is granted. I will fight this, and I will sit through a trial, and I will tell every tiny little thing. And so will everybody else that has contact and knows what happened to Sammy.
He wants to try to fight us on this, we'll fight right back.
And you're all stronger now than you were 5 years ago.
That's right. He's not fighting broken people anymore. We're strong now. So bring it on.